Ponder this. Governing powers, I submit to you, have two distinct possible approaches to managing the people. If we were using as our material, external springboard actual governments of people, then I could point out that it is almost a classical distinction between an absolute tyranny and an apparent democracy, a republic. And it's this. The controlling powers have these two distinct possible approaches to managing the people. The first off is to control their behavior and let them think whatever they want to in quiet. Now that, historically, that apparently externally, is the most efficient form of an absolute tyranny. That you don't care what the people think. There is no propaganda program going on. You simply control their behavior. You tell people what to do. You let them know that if any of these directives are ignored, if you do leave your trash out on Wednesday, we'll shoot you and all your family. And you don't care what they think. You do not care that to themselves, in the quiet of their own home, they curse you, think ill of you, think that you perhaps have gone overboard. The absolute tyranny, that kind of operation, shows no interest, expends no energy in trying to affect what people think. It's absolute control of behavior. The other possibility, of course, is attempting to affect what people think so as to bring about the desired behavior. Now that would appear, using external examples, would appear to be more like the part of the world in which most of us were born and grew up. What appears to be a relatively free society that, other than the kind of laws that all groups of people have, when I say that, as opposed to controlling behavior. But beyond that, look at the way our apparent politics are run, our elections. Apparently, they are trying to affect the way you think to get you to vote for them, to affect your behavior. And then in general, when it gets past the political area, as it's called in the city, if it gets into the idea of patriotism and statesmanship, it's not just on getting me elected, then those who are in some sort of power apparently want to encourage that kind of patriotic feeling to make you feel good about the whole system, the whole power structure. Of course, it appears to be patriotism, pure and simple, to get you to feel good about your country, your tribe, so that you will behave decently. Whether if you belong to the X nation, to get you to think in such a way that you'll behave like a good patriotic Xer. Now these appear to be two completely different approaches, and there have been, you might notice, weakenings from these two extremes, which is a weakening of power. I would, while we're still there, before I drag you internally to where all this matters, I could point out that the largest and latest attempt in most of your lifetimes, we could say, is the so-called Marxist/socialist revolutions, such as Russia, and they have watered it down. The way it has happened to life is not just the attempt to directly control behavior, but a bastardization. Hence all the propaganda of, yeah, we're kind of tyrannical, but if you people start thinking right, we don't have to do all that. And it won't work. And on the other hand, if you want to look at the other extreme of this dichotomy, if you look upon what appears to be the more freer, antipodal to the Marxist socialist attempt, us, you have more and more a relinquishing of apparently trying to affect what people think, and more, as witnessed by the number of laws passed by local legislatures and the National Congress every year. More and more of the laws just to directly affect behavior. Less and less of, well, what you think. We'll get into that later and how you feel about this, but right now, do this or go to jail. The more you have that kind of watering down of the absolute power on either end, or the absolute approach, the less it operates, the less efficient it operates. But now back to what I originally laid out for you, which is always the kind of map that makes sense to people with two eyes, and that's a map that has two colors, a map that shows two possibilities. The attempt to control behavior and let people think as they will in quiet, or the attempt to control, to affect their thinking, and thus bring about the desired behavior. Now to leave the world, apparently, of politics out there, and not a moment too soon, or even I would go to sleep. Now does this sound as though it might have any promise to what is going on inside of people? There has been, under other names, a continual struggle between these two approaches. And I say struggle in the widest use of that term because at times there apparently is no struggle. Apparently at times there is a power seated fairly safely within a person here or there, and one of these approaches is going on. But remember this, that end-time power is really well seated. End-time power is established. It is contested. And so the other alternative is always outside the throne door, is always outside the parliament, the castle, the halls of Congress. So if in one person, apparently the established power was simply attempting to control behavior, you always have, if that one person is alive, in the true sense of the word, you have a potential contest for power. But now outside the areas that would normally be referred to as political, now look at the world's religions. Every time I say religion, but now you understand that I'm also including philosophies, and people do not have to be apparently die-hard converts and living up to every little piece of dogma of a religion, but I just use that as an overall umbrella rather than talk about each person's apparent individual philosophy, which out in the city, people ain't got no little individual philosophy. They say they do, but you find out all it is you listen to somebody at a bar giving you their individual philosophy, and if you can hear it all you got to say is, oh, you used to be a Catholic and left the church. They go, yeah, how you know? Or, hey, you used to be so-and-so. Yeah, I did. All they've got is a piece, a reconstituted piece of the general religion. Can you see that you have in the world what would apparently be, either in the name of religions or political systems, these two almost apparently opposing forces, / inclinations, / possibilities in individuals. Now any individual in the city, of course, is not freed from what would apparently be the kind of influences extant and moving across his neighborhood, if not his whole city. Now, we're oftentimes referred to in the city as your cultural group, your religion, your national background group. But within that, you can have an individual, and you can find it in yourself that you have the inclination, from wherever it apparently came from, to either try and control your behavior. And the more that seems to be your natural inclination, the more that seems to hold out promise of some establishment of power, and thus a real establishment of some sort of predictable order in you, the more it seems to be, I will control my behavior, then you have an automatic scale at work in ordinary people. That is, the less attention, the less interest, the less notice you're going to give about how you think. Your feeling is going to be like a good absolute tyrant. If I could jump in your brain and your nervous system and point all this out, your feeling would be, well, fuck what I think. All I want to do is quit drinking. All I want to do is quit having nightmares. All I want to do is quit beating up on women. All I want to do is be nicer. I don't care what I think. Where is the other group? That I will affect what I think, and therefore it will affect my behavior. At first blush, they may not seem to be as prevalent. They may not even seem to be as obvious. But they're there. It's just not analyzed in that way. At any given time, if any of you were following what I just said, and your own nervous system had already run along that line, at any given time in the 3D world, you could look upon the body of life and find the appearance that one of these approaches seems to be predominant at any given time. But the idea, the possibility of controlling, affecting what one thinks, and therefore then controlling how one behaves as a result of that, is always there. That possibility is always going on. That inclination is always running through some segment of humanity. Can each one of you feel that, don't worry about right now, don't worry about last week or 2 hours ago, but say before you got involved with this, can all of you feel that there was one of those governmental, one of those political approaches well entrenched in you, that if a little fairy godfather or toad had flown out of the bushes before you got involved with this and said, all right, what's your wish? What's your wish? Would your wish been based upon behavior with little to no regard for what you think? Or would it be otherwise? In other words, would your one wish be, all right, what I want to do is lose weight and be thin forever? And the little fairy toad say, well, how about all the dreams you have nowadays? Every time you go on a diet, you lay down at night, and then when you're walking around in the daytime, all you do is dream of the great gods Baskin and his brother Robbins. And you say, yeah, but you told me it's a real wish I get granted. That's right. Well, just grant my wish and I'll worry about the rest of it. Who cares what I think? I don't care what I think if you actually grant my wish, that my behavior is changed with no apparent linkage to what I think. Or would it be otherwise? Would you be one part of that segment of humanity that has been following a kind of, from the Western establishment of the Yellow Circuit, at least, the idea that as a man thinks, so he is? It's long before Christianity. Would that be your wish? Would anybody feel as though that is the most natural, that would apparently be the most conducive to my particular inner structure, the way I think? That if I had my wish would be that I would have some kind of direct control, or at least have the ability to strongly affect the way I think. And if I could do that, the rest of it I can handle. It's not the way you would treat your people. Would you have faith in that kind of apparent freedom, which is relative freedom compared to the, as I was describing it, the absolute tyranny exemplified by simply controlling people's behavior, and to hell with what they think? That's not even the point. Who cares? If they will follow the directives of the power structure, if they'll behave the way we say they behave, I don't care how they think. I don't have time for it. It's not efficient. The efficient way is to make people behave the way we want them. Establish order. Primarily, of course, in those conditions, they have other words for it, but you and I should know, be able to discuss what it is real easy. It's fear. If they'll behave the way we tell them to behave, who cares what they think? I ask you again, what would be your wish? If that doesn't strike you as pertinent, then I would suggest to you most strongly that many of you have already been through this before you run across me. Forms apparently of some sort of self-help philosophies or mystical or religious cults in the full, widest possible sense of the word. You may have done it apparently on your own, through reading a book, through getting caught up in some contemporary fad that apparently was involved with psychological attempts at self-help. There is a specific gap. There is a specific difference between attempting to just control behavior to controlling thought. That there is a gap wherein the ordinary when they begin to dilute one of the others, I was pointing out, becomes less efficient. That if it starts out as an absolute tyranny, that we're going to control behavior, and it goes on for some length of time, it will begin to weaken. First thing you know, whoever's in charge, whatever person or persons, begins to weaken. They will then begin to allow influences from the other possibility. To wit, they will repeal or quit enforcing one or two laws that they've had a lot of comment about. People contesting their power on the basis of some of what you ask for, some of what you people demand, some of what the power demands of us is intolerable. And they say, all right, you don't have to do that. We're not going to force you to do it, but, and then they start dragging in the other possibility. They'll start saying, but, think about it. Consider our position. We had some reason for heretofore demanding you do it. You are looking at the beginning of the end. It may not happen within a week or a year or your lifetime, but you're looking at power which is dying. And conversely, on the other side, if you start out trying, that you started out, some power takes over a tribe or a group of people, and it says, all right, what we're going to do is be as democratic as possible. That the government, the power, is going to be the people themselves. That the power amounts to how many people we got. We'll have a head count. Then that constitutes the power. Then, if it begins to weaken, and I'm not going into what I mean by weaken tonight, but if the right-hand possibility begins to weaken, the feeling begins, the thought begins to go through the people who are the power apparently there, that affecting people's behavior is not having the immediate and necessary desired result. There's some things going on that are detrimental to the well-being of us all, and obviously we cannot wait long enough for the people to start thinking right. That is, all of us. So we're going to have to go ahead and curtail some of the apparent freedom, because some things must be seen to now. We can't wait, for instance, for everyone to begin to think in such a way that it's not right, it's not profitable for us to steal from one another. It's taking too long. We're falling apart, so we're going to have to start establishing some rules. Rule number one, you can't steal from each other. I don't care what you think about it. Just stop it, or you're going to go to jail. We're going to have to take away your freedom. You're seeing the beginning of the end of that power. Comma, now, internally, not out there, internally, insofar as it's always possible, we're looking at the opposite. That you have got to have a kind of improvised, almost infinite string of variations that you can do on this same old song of I've got two choices. That is, the kind of co-mingling is not detrimental, it is necessary. Put it to you another way. To do this, the only way that I know how to do it, which is the only thing that's of any value and importance to you or me, the only way to do it now with you people at this time on this planet, it is not in any way pertinent, profitable to use one of those at the exclusion of the other. But note, again you have, if you need another reason of why this is so hard to do, why it's almost impossible to see, why it's almost a certainty that the city in general, if they are ever brushed, if they ever bump into this, go what? Or they look and they're not even sure they bumped into anything. Because of the fact that if anything's going to be done in the city, one of those possibilities is the most pertinent, is the most profitable, and is the most efficient. Whereas here it is just the opposite insofar as that exists. That is, true opposites. If it were not, then this would be simply, to take the one on the left, the first possibility as I numbered it, would be that this would be absolutely made up of directives affecting behavior. Look at, since most of you are from the Western world, I assume, look at the Christian Judaic background of the Ten Commandments. Which one do they fall into? Some of you people's nervous system that knows as many of the commandments as I can think of, some of you, let me talk for you, might go, well, wait a minute, that's a mixture. Because some of them are just absolute behavior, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, but then some of them are about thou shalt love our God with all your heart. But that's the way you think, that's not really behavior. Or thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife or husband or Cadillac. That you might say, well, that's not just behavior. Nay, nay. To speak up for history, to speak up for the past movements of life, I would suggest to you that that's not true. Do they ask you to prove? Does any religion say, all right, now prove it. Prove that you love our God more than any other God. Prove that you don't lust after your neighbor's wife. Prove it. All you got to do is say, has anybody caught me with my neighbor's wife? Nope. Behavior speaks for itself. That's it. That was really sort of an aside, just trying to dance with any of you people who have intelligence, burgeoning intelligence enough that you can listen to your own nervous system as the general nervous system of life itself, the city side of life, that even while I'm presenting something, you can realize that, hey, this could be looked at another way. But hey, who told you that? Who told you that whatever I said could be looked at another way? Who told you that? That's getting too confusing. All right, let's go. At the ordinary level, it would have to be one of these two ways. Is that simple enough? If it was not even a religion, if it was some sort of club, the Kiwanis, the benevolent protective order of elks and armadillos and all those strange groups of Masons and God knows what all these groups require some kind of submission to rules of behavior. They all do. You can't be a member if you're going to be a Boy Scout, a Brownie. You have got to submit yourself to the control of directives having to do with your behavior. If it's just no more than, all right, you have got to be here at least for the annual meeting. You have got to at least be here and sign your name, and you have got to pay at least your dues for the year, at least on that one occasion. And you can't tell anybody where our secret handshake is. And that's about it. But it'll get down to that. Now they may put in something. They may have some sort of oath, some sort of secret pledge, some song that they all do together, and it may refer to, they may call it something else like the movements of my heart, the way I feel, the way I believe, but they're talking about the second part, thought. So they may pledge, sing, chant, pledge that we will hold in our hearts the great love for the benevolent order, protective order of chameleons, and we will love the Grand Master of the Lodge, and we will love all of our brothers. They may say that, but nobody, since it doesn't happen at the religious level, which is a little more stringent in the city than the order of the daisies and chameleons, they do not come around and say, wait a minute, I heard you when we were doing the pledge, I didn't hear real sincerity in your voice. You proved that you love the Grand Master of the Lodge. Have I ever punched him in the nose? No. You ever heard me badmouth him? No. Have I ever gone and thrown rocks at his house? No. Okay. I guess you got me. That's all you can do. But look at it another way. Is that the least you can do? Not just all you can do. Is there any other possibility? If you are not attempting to control behavior, how does someone know that they are under control? How do they know that they are a part of that nation, that state, that organization? If no demand is made directly of your behavior, how do you know that power is being executed? How is there any sense of order? How can any group of people survive if they're being called the Library Association of Snellville, if they're being called the International Order of Elks, if they're being called the Cosmic Church of the Great God Larry? If there are not sufficient directives aimed specifically at behavior, how can you know that a group exists? How can you know that you're a part of the group? How can you know who to exclude? Right quick. You know we're not talking about library associations or being an elf or dressing up in funny clothes and being a part of some lodge somewhere. How do you know that you are a part of anything internally? How do you sense any feel that there is established order in you, that there's anything predictable, without what? Directives that are already in you genetically. You think about it otherwise ordinarily. You think you've learned them. You think you picked them up culturally or religiously. But unless there is in you directives, whether you're living by them or not, whether you're honoring them or not, but there are directives aimed specifically at behavior. The end result all the time is known as that grand and glorious experience of guilt. But everyone has this. Everyone has, even if you do not recognize it now, everyone has had at one time the sufficiently long experience of living under an absolute tyranny. You didn't call it that, but an absolute tyranny wherein, whereat, where, when, and whereby specific directives were set up at behavior. The number one possibility, and it gave no accounting, showed no interest, did not even bespeak of any interest in what you thought, much less what you thought about the directives. It told you what to do, told you what was to be done and what was not to be done. Now by the time you reach the age of terminal horniness, or 18 or 21, once your hormones have run away from home and you followed them, once this has happened, you have forgotten, in essence, your time under this absolute tyranny. The tyranny, I tell you again, is not your parents, was not your church, was not your culture, was not your religion, was not your school, was not your nanny, was not your neighborhood. Oh, I know you thought it was one of them, now that I bring it up, but it wasn't. What it was, we're not going into, I'm running late. But it wasn't that. It wasn't any of those. But it was a forgotten absolute tyranny. Now you have. Ordinary people would think they have it psychologically. I'm saying it's otherwise. You now have this ingrained, inescapable, lingering, still effective series of directives regarding behavior. Not your thoughts, not the way you think about the directives. Simply directives that thou shalt and thou shalt not. And I don't mean that simply in the religious sense, since I said shall and shalt not. It's not just religious. Everyone has this, quote, ingrained in them throughout this world. How are you going to produce the alternative so that you can correctly commingle the possibilities, the approaches of controlling behavior, as opposed to attempting to affect thought so as to produce the desired behavior? Where are you going to get any information? Where are you going to develop any ability to try and affect how you think, when how you think, no matter what the original directives were about behavior, to try and learn to think about it, they're going to be in conflict. It doesn't matter whether you came from a background where most people were Jewish, Catholic, black, white, Irish. It doesn't matter. Because to begin to find out how to touch, if you can, this kind of alternate, this new intelligence, then whatever it is that you begin to think in a kind of internal nascent democracy, whatever you begin to think, however you try and exercise your freedom, is going to be in conflict with the directives already established as to behavior. And it doesn't matter what they were. I guarantee you they will be in conflict. Any of you with a mathematical turn of mind, or else those of you who are roofers, can immediately see how that works. It's just the great beauty, the unseen balance and justice of this, since I'm always complimenting life on the way it does things in the city, that once you realize here, you don't have to keep going and distinguishing and say, well, this is going to affect you. What's your background? You look like you might be a woman to me. You look like you might be a Caucasian, perhaps, are you? You look like you might be a Catholic. And then that this has to say, well, now wait. Now then, if you take something that you heard here and you look at it a certain way, it's going to have one effect. Whereas you over there, sir, I believe you must be a man. Am I correct? Then this is probably going to have a different effect, because the way this is going to make her feel and think is not, I'm telling her it's going to be almost diametrically opposed to what she presently thinks being a Caucasian woman. And this will not be true with you. That's not correct. The beauty is, no matter what you do, it's always going to be in opposition to what you were. It doesn't matter who you were. It saves a lot of time. I mean, it's real efficient, assuming this is efficient at all, or has a possibility, that you notice I don't have to stop along the way and say, wait a minute, I used an example the other day about the Catholic Church. But let me point out how, because some of you probably weren't Catholic. Raise your hands. Well, all right. Now, here's the way it would affect probably your background not growing up with the same kind of pressure as a Catholic had. You notice I don't have to do that, because it doesn't matter. It truly doesn't matter, because this is in conflict with everything that you were. And so, and once you see that, you don't have to say, wait a minute, you don't know what I were. Yeah, I do. And it doesn't matter what you were, because this is in conflict with it. If it's not, then either tut-tut on what you were or tut-tut on what this is. But never mind that. You recall that last time we met, I was pointing out that a purpose of power everywhere, apparently out there and in here, a purpose of power is to establish and to maintain order. And I didn't go into a long discussion with order, but you people should be getting good enough to know how to stretch your own intelligence at times. Out there, you must see that power is executed in what apparently is the plant world, the world of natural philosophy, the natural phenomenon of animals, the weather, the general, save man for a second, ecological system, that there are powers involved. Just ordinary people think of it as natural powers, the working of nature. But the exercise of that kind of power, the establishment of it, is to maintain, after it's established, a sense of order, a kind of order. That is, from one view, if you can see it right quick, what ordinary intelligence perceives as being reality is a passing impression of order. If it's not reality. So you have got this externally, but then mentioned also, somewhat en passant, that internally, the whole idea of one having an individual self, the whole idea, the whole purpose, from one view, of the nervous system ever growing to the point in man that it produced a brain, is to exercise another kind of order that's not extant on this planet, not that you can see, in man, not just so he could talk, not just so he could be humorous, not just since he could make X-rated movies and write vademecums, but so that, on another level, he could apparently establish another kind of order. That's just to bring us up to date, remember? All right, in this purpose of power, the exercise and establishment of power being to create and maintain a kind of order. And for the time being, keep order in quotation marks if you must, because I mean all sorts of things by that. It is, if it helps, I'll repeat again, it is in a sense, from an ordinary view, what reality is, to ordinary consciousness, is a sense of order. Right, in line with that, can you note that to do this, as I was hinting and almost saying the other night, a real revolutionist has got to have a kind of increase in the exercise of power in himself. There has got to be another kind of order. It has got to be a distillation, a refinement almost of disorder, which would be a commingling of those two. It is to refine a new kind of order in you, but it cannot be established simply on one of these two bases. If it is, if it's possible, and it is in rare relative instances in man, you become a fanatic, because you apparently have taken the kind of the partial state of disorder that's always in an ordinary person's perception, and you have, if you're a fanatic, you have distilled it to the point that you apparently can internally latch on to one of these. Need I tell you which one is the most predominant in cases of fanatics? Well, a few of you I don't. The rest of you parenthetically, when's the last time historically you recall that there was a freedom fanatic, an intellectual fanatic, I mean the true sense, a philosophical fanatic, somebody who gained control and then through some, I hate to think about it, horrible, devilish methods made people think to the point that they had to shoot him because the man was so intolerable and so heartless. Before that, this poor group of people had been starved and beaten and had all their property taken, which is one thing. But then a new tyrant came in, and he dropped all that, but that's beside the point. Let me tell you what happened. He made us think. The first kind we can do with, well, you can tolerate that, but at any rate. There is always a difference between a fanatic and this. You have got to be able to re-distill a kind of disorder, to almost redefine what would be disorder to ordinary people and turn it into your own kind of order. Because if you do not, you would be a fanatic. Now I can stop it in here because it's easy to spot somebody becoming fanatical. Now so I can stop it, I can throw you out, and if you still remain a fanatic on your own, that's your benefit. It's not my business to interfere with somebody's hobby, but I can stop it here. But left to your own devices, it is a small side step to try and make some new order out of disorder. And you can believe that you're doing it here, and then suddenly go, aha, now I see, period. Ah, now I have the final picture in mind. Aha. And you don't. It may be your final picture of mind in regards to this, but you're done for. You have now, if you persevere in that position, you have then established power that is uncontested, which is simply a death knoll. You have been diagnosed, without you knowing it, as being terminally ill. You're finished. Let's turn the tape over. Let me end this paragraph by a great rhetorical question. Remember, I don't mean rhetorical question, but there is no usable synonym unless I make up one. What use is individuality if it is not truly in power? Everybody cherishes individuality. Even those who live under the first possibility, that first approach up there. That is part of being human. That is part of having that kind of human sense of order in you. That is having a nervous system developed enough that you think, that you have a mind. Then you have a feeling of cherishing your own individuality. And the more that the high end of the nervous system is in charge, the more that person, and there normally will be found in larger groups of persons, a tribe, which has higher and higher thresholds of respect for the individuality of humans. The further are they down the scale, that is, the less they're run by the hand of the nervous system, the less meaning life seems to have. Life physically and the individuality of life is just, you can see it, it's still extant on this planet from one side of the planet to the other. It is extant in this city from one side of the city to the other, and it's extant in people, in you, from one end of the nervous system to the other. One end of your nervous system has no more respect, does not cherish human life any more than people starving in Ethiopia, to use that as a so-called example, that may be killing each other off of a handful of grain. You don't have to go to the other side of the planet, to a starving part of this world. There is that part in you. There is also that part in you that is against abortion, against capital punishment. There is that part of you that will weep when it reads that a fly has died. If you belong in this, there are those extremes in you because there are extremes on this planet. Now, my question to end up the paragraph was, of what use is all of this to you now, not ordinary people, because they've got no control over it and they'll never have any insight into it. But I'm asking you, what possible use is the power of individuality, or the existence of individuality, if it does not exercise some specific power in you? Well, I was going to leave it as a rhetorical question, but I guess I better not. The answer is none. If you've got to see it another way, your individuality, if you don't do anything about it, what does it amount to? It amounts to you writing me, whether you do it physically, or up here, me, dear Ann, Miss Manners, your mother, God, whining about what's going on. And you get back a note from me or from God that says, you know, give me a break, get off this. It's got nothing to do with living. And so you wait a week, you wait a month, and you write God back, you write me back. And you think it was a different problem. It's the same problem. The problem is I want to go, that I individually am being hurt again. Is that the value of individuality? In the city it is. What's the point of being an individual unless you got individual problems? How do you know you're an individual? Because I got problems that people around me don't have. In fact, I bet I'm the only person here in the Loyal Order of Library-Loving Elks. I'll bet I'm the only person in here that was in 5 different orphanages before I was 6. See, that's how I know I'm an individual. Some of you mother, father may have died, but hell, I was in 5 different orphanages before I was 6 years old. Think about it. That is their feeling of individuality. That's the purpose of being an individual, that I have suffered in ways that you can't match. In this, in attempting to do this, if your individuality, if the apparent reality, the apparent possibility of it being real that you are an individual is not used to establish some power and some new form of order in you, you've wasted your life doing this. You should have stayed in the city and smoked dope and done everything you wanted to, gotten fat, gotten thin, died, rose from the dead, went to church, left the church. You should have done all that. You wasted your time here because you're doing nothing. There is no use for individuality in this unless it is going to be used to establish and to direct some power. And it's not the power to whine. That's a lack of power. If you had any power, you wouldn't whine. The more power you've got over you, the less need you've got to whine. It's not just your own nervous system maybe being able to say, well, you keep talking like that, and all you're saying is we're to shut up and be stoic. No, you're to shut up, that's for sure. But the idea, you know, the tacit part of me just then speaking for your own nervous system, like we should just shut up, but hell, I'm still going to suffer. If you begin to do this, you don't suffer. Not the same way. So it's not just me trying to say that I want to affect your behavior directly, and I'm just telling you to shut up. It's not that simple. It's not that crude. It's not that hard. It's not that complex. But if you are not attempting, if you're not even attempting to think about, to see what I'm saying, you're making a mistake, and that is that there is no use for individuality unless you are attempting to establish and maintain some power in you. And from that, some sense of new order. And it will vanquish whining, routine suffering, all the hobbies of the city. In other words, you'll shut up naturally. All right, paragraph 1A, R2. I I had a historical question before I evidently will answer it my damn self. Which does history best remember? A conqueror who enslaves thousands, or a rebel who frees millions? All right, think about it a second. I got a cup here. You got the answer, didn't you? That's number one. You knew that, didn't you? Who is it history best remembers? A conqueror who enslaves. Notice I used again accidentally knew actually what I was saying. The figures, the conqueror who enslaves thousands, or a rebel who frees, all right, I'll increase it, billions. Right, assuming that what I'm saying that there is some observable 3D historical basis therein, the second possibility is almost limited to what? FNs, footnotes. They're almost forgotten in history. Who stands out in history? The enslavers. Think about it a second. Shouldn't take you long. It should hit you immediately, so I don't have to keep rewriting this, because it gets worse every time I have to repeat it. History best remembers, and history is, of course, your nervous system too. But just what you apparently have read, what everyone else seems to remember, what everyone seems to say collectively, are the important figures in history. Or who? The enslavers. Yeah, but there have been people who apparently were those who freed those who'd been enslaved. Oh yeah, all right. They're real big time. Who are they? When they start listing the famous people in history, where are these freedom fighters? These people who apparently have freed other humans in some way. Of course, I start out, we sound like, as always, I assume that you think I sound like, we're talking about actual people and political events. But as always, too, if that's all we're talking about, you should find it interesting that I am able to present a scenario couched in the terms, the binary terms I just did, that there would seem to be two possibilities that should have somewhere near equal probability. That if history is going to remember this and that, history recounts the good times and history recounts the bad times, right? Well, it should. History takes note of the 12 hours of daylight and the 12 hours of nighttime, right? So it should take note, since we've had them, those people in history who seem intent on being dominant and capturing their fellow man, but then contraire, there have been those who come along and tried to free them, or else we'd all be captive. So they're there in history. You know, I can think of a few names. People are considered the father of our country. People who are called in other nations freedom fighters. They got statues of them doing stuff like that. But I ask you again, you should be able to hear what I'm saying. Who does history best remember? I phrased it just right, at least just right to satisfy me. Who does it best remember? Those conquerors who enslaved thousands, or a rebel here and there who apparently freed billions. Now, TWE, why are things so arranged? Why is life so arranged? Who do they make movies about? Do I have to carry this any further? Who do they make movies about? Who do they write novels about? Who do they write historical discourses on? Who do people have as heroes? Who do people the most think about if you think about such as this? If something jogged your memory, it could be a historical mention on the news, it could be a made-for-TV movie based upon either Genghis Khan or Mother Teresa, or it could be you reading a Superman comic book. Now, I don't want to think about it because some of you people probably still do. But this whole feeling of heroes, is it the captors of life, or those who apparently are freedom bringers? It is not the latter. Why? What is life up to? To what ends are things so arranged? And for you, those of you riding by real fast in a wheelbarrow or being pushed in a wheelbarrow, I'll point out to you for tonight, this does not mean that people in the city, the ordinary people, are deluded. It does not mean that there are evil forces at work that have twisted history around. It means just what it means. Can't you hear that? It means just what I said. I just pointed it out, and you can go, yeah. But now it doesn't mean there's some conspiracy. It doesn't mean anything's wrong. The only thing wrong from the viewpoint of doing this is to look at that and think, well, something's wrong here. That's the only thing wrong. What you've done is take local reporting of an international event and went, this will not fly back home. The people will never believe this, and even if they believe it, they won't like it. Why does history best remember those who apparently are the enslavers? Why does there seem to be such a dearth of acknowledgement for life, from life, of those who, relatively speaking, could have been referred to as freedom bringers? I could read this out a long time, but I think I'll just suddenly stop and go to something else. Can you do that? Check the bylaws. In fact, while he's checking the bylaws, there's a handful. Maybe I'll use tonight again to wrap up some, I shouldn't say wrap up, bring back in some pieces of things I've talked about off and on for the last few weeks. Remember, I pointed out that there is a danger, a real specific danger. It's the only thing I'm going to take time to refer to it as. Well, you people are running up a kind of debt with your involvement with this. And you just keep running it up and never pay it off. And one way is it manifests itself, that some of you will hear probably as soon as I say it. He laughingly hoped, thought, wished that it's possible to drown in freedom. That is one of the negative payoffs of you not paying back your debt to this. I see, as always, or as oftentimes, my hope, my wish was in Detroit. I mean in vain. Okay. How about this? How many of you, don't raise your hands, unless we're all going to put our heads on our desk. And then you can raise your hand. How many of you do not suffer as much as you used to? How many of you do not have as many bad dreams? How many of you do not any longer fear a great illness falling upon you sometime this weekend, or death going to catch up with you someday? How many of you seem to be a little more relaxed and seem to have a little bit more freedom than you used to? And the truth is, a whole lot of you. A whole lot of you have a whole lot of that more freedom. But then, some of this can begin to be undefined heretofore, but can begin to be, instead of a boon, it begins to feel like a burden. It seems like it's almost possible that I could drown in a sea of freedom, relatively speaking, compared to what I was. You seem to have less to do. You seem to have less immediate interest. There seems to be much less immediate pressure on you to do something. You know, like worry, or to call up your mother, or to call up somebody and to talk about it. Now there seems to be less to talk about. That is a part of the potential negative effect of not paying off a debt to this. That you seem to have gained something, in this case more freedom, and it begins to rot. It begins, instead of being beneficial, it's like somebody gave you an unexpected meal and you don't ever eat it and you can't get rid of it, and it just lays there in the kitchen or your bedroom, under the bed, and begins to rot. And you think, well, I wish this would go away. But you don't really think that, because it was such a good deal when it started. And you just never think about, I wish it'd go away. Plus, if you do, you don't know how to make it go away. The only way to make it go away is for you to go away. That was one wrap-up, one pull in of a tail end. I mentioned over the last couple of meetings, specifically last time, as I recall, that it's not necessary doing this that a would-be revolutionist knows everything, but it's that you cannot exclude anything. Instead of me spending a long time, let me, on this, any more of my continuation, let me encourage you, if you need it, to pursue it a little further along this line, that in regard to that, a would-be revolutionist would leave no available part or function unexercised. A real revolutionist would leave no available part, noun, or function, process, unexercised. So that you might not be the strongest person in the world, but at any given spot, I've jumped parabolics in midstream, of course, but there'd be no part of your body that would be excruciatingly weak. You understand? It's the same thing as me saying you don't have to know everything, but you can not exclude anything. You can leave no available part or function unexercised. And believe it or not, I could refer you back to this also. I'll admit a secret. I know damn well not enough of you understood the first 30 minutes of tonight. Not enough of you got anything out of it. You are caught in this dichotomy. Are you picking up again to remind people I keep pointing? Of I've got to do so-and-so. I've got to stop doing so-and-so. And or, withal, you sit around and you think. So you got your choice. You're either attempting to control yourself directly through behavior, or you sit around and think about thinking a different way with this kind of lollipop, rainbow belief that, yeah, if I can do that, then my change in behavior would naturally ensue therefrom. Can anybody see a connection between action and thinking of action? Between mass and energy, between nouns and verbs, between two possible approaches of the exercise of power, controlling behavior without caring what people think, withal attempting to affect how people think to produce the desired behavior. If you're going to do one at the exclusion of the other, even for a second, then for that second, you died. There has to be an internal recombining, a redistillation of these two apparently opposing approaches. I was trying to include this in me pointing out that there can be no part of you, no part of life, no function, no available potential function in you, no extant available function going on apparently out there, outside of you in life. There can be none of that that goes unexercised. All right, let's get, since we're trying to establish a place where the elite and the empiricalist and determinist and existentialist and logical autonomist meet, I guess we can go this far. And we can be more pragmatic. If Some of you don't have to read anything about the James brothers. A couple of things. To do this, to be a revolutionist, you cannot take any pleasure. This is going to sound the way I'm about to say it. First blush may sound like it's getting close to being religious or spiritual, and you know by now it's not. If you think it is, then I'll have to say you can't fucking do so and so. I'll do all that. To do this, you cannot take any pleasure. You cannot accept any apparent pleasure. You cannot entertain any apparent pleasure that seems to arise from someone else's pain, problems, or uncertainty, which you could parenthetically refer to as dumbness. This is not on some moral basis, and certainly not on any known religious basis, although this could easily, verbally be repeated or already said within some temple or synagogue, some hut somewhere with a religious symbol on the top of it. But it goes on in people continually, even if it apparently to them has nothing to do with morality or spirituality. It is a genetic tie between people, and it only comes out in a mechanically diluted form. A flawed form is coming out as mores, religious dictates of saying you should not enjoy the suffering of another. All right, forget the verbalization of it. There is a genetic nexus within the body of life running through people that makes this necessary to someone attempting to do this. It makes it necessary that you see that there is built in the inclination, the genetic drive, to receive what seems to be genetic, molecular, physical pleasure. It may not show in your face, and you may not hoop and holler, but the pleasure that seems to arise from the pains, from the problems, and from the uncertainties of other people. And it can happen. When I'm saying pleasure, I'm not going to stay on this and preach a sermon to you. I want you to feel it, though, that you apparently, going by ordinary intelligence, you would say, well, I'm not enjoying this. But to even be interested in somebody else's pain, that you might sit there and me saying take pleasure from it, if you're ordinary, you could say, well, you're wrong. I am watching this TV documentary on so-and-so, or this part of tonight's news, and I'm concerned about that person or those people undergoing that kind of torture, that kind of deprivation, that kind of humiliation. You are taking pleasure. It's arising from their pain. It's arising from their problems, or it's arising from their uncertainty, which is a form of ignorance. In all cases, you are being critic to life, you are being critic to them and their circumstance, and you're being the superior power. You believe in your nervous system, that is your intelligence. You believe that you and they are dancing, and if indeed you are the smarter of the partners, because this would not happen to you. If you were in those conditions, you would say something, or you would change your behavior. You would do something about the circumstance. You are receiving pleasure, and it's arising from either the pains, the problems, or the uncertainties of other people, and you cannot do that. Do any of you see any deeper, or feel that you can see any deeper, why I have done everything from laugh and ridicule to just point out to you that you've got no business reading the genres of National Enquirers, and it doesn't have to be contemporary, it can be many of the historical novels. You got no business looking at wrecks when you go by. You got no business being entertained by that. It's got nothing to do with what the city thinks of as morality or goodness or a spiritual life, it has a molecular negative effect. You are deriving a form of very mechanical. It's quite real. You didn't learn it. It's human. You're deriving a kind of pleasure that's arising from the non-pleasure of other people. You are stepping, even though you don't see it. You and your kind, in this particular instance, whatever it is, you are stepping on the foot of this other partner with whom you're presently dancing. You may be dancing with them just by watching this little thing on the TV screen. You're stepping on their feet and enjoying it. I guess that was fairly obtuse. You believe, in other cases, that you're seeing two people dance and one of them's getting stepped on. But it ain't my fault, because I'm just watching it. And you receive pleasure. But if you're receiving pleasure, you are stepping on their foot. That's why it is not realized. That people cannot, ordinary intelligence does not realize this is all one organism. And like any good organism, there are parts that apparently, from ordinary sight, are in direct conflict and opposition with one another, but they're actually dancing to one another. That all the apparent opposites, all the apparent conflicts within the total body of life are not only tolerable, they're necessary. So people do not realize that, and they do not realize that at the molecular level, everybody is in communication. You're in communication with yourself internally, but it just blows away the ordinary city intelligence to say that molecularly everybody's in contact. That you do not stop at the end of your skin. The pleasure that you are receiving is arising apparently from somebody else's pain, problems, uncertainties, difficulties. Even if you say, well, I'm just observing it, so I'm not an active participant, you're an idiot. You are as dumb as they are. If you're receiving pleasure from it, energy is being passed. And I have got to waste all this time if you say, wait a minute, I'm staying here in line at the supermarket buying good fresh bread baked by little monks, and I'm about to contribute money to Jerry's kids, and I look around and there's this headline in this paper. I didn't tell them to put it there, and it's something about these poor people starving in some part of the world, or this family being burned out of their home and their children dying and being maimed for life. I didn't tell them to put it there, and I certainly don't enjoy when I look at it. In fact, I almost cry. If you believe that, if you don't hear what I'm saying, and you can say, well, I had no part of that. I am not responsible. If you're participating, you're responsible. And don't tell me, or else you just tell me I'm wasting my time, for you to say, wait a minute, this supposedly happened 1,000 miles from where I live. I see the byline, and in fact it happened 2 weeks ago. What does it have to do with me? I just turned around and looked at it. I could not have prevented it. I've got nothing to do with it. You do have something to do with it. Energy is being transferred. There is a conversion going on. You know, everybody else, it doesn't matter. It's serving a purpose in the city. But if you cannot realize that that is a form of you receiving pleasure from the problems of somebody else, from the non-pleasure, that you are apparently receiving to you at that crude level some kind of positive energy from what is non-positive, somebody else's problems, pains, uncertainties. If you don't see that, I'm not sure you're ever going to see anything. If you can't see it just for a second, I know you're not going to walk out and remember it. You can't hold on to it. But if you can't see the reality that there are molecular messages going on, not just between you and I and you and everybody else, there's molecular messages going on between you and a piece of newsprint. And if you don't know that, then you're part of the ones back in the city that you think, well, there are parts of life that's not alive. Not too far removed from that, let me point out something else. The time has got to come for any real troopers, people involved with this that's going anywhere. Time's got to come at least once, and I'm not limited to once, that you've got to have, a real would-be revolutionist has got to have a day of full amnesty. That you have got to totally release, forgive, forget all apparent treasonable, questionable, ill-timed acts and actors. It will never happen accidentally, as almost all the religions of the world would lead you to believe. That is, that you'll accidentally somehow fall under the sway of some priest or shaman somewhere, or you'll sign up to be a part of some church, and suddenly you'll forgive everybody. Suddenly you'll be a man harboring no debts. Do you believe that? I guess you believe that the right kind of constructed garage in some way will attract Ferraris. And if you build it and go away and come back and open the door, one will be there. You've got to understand the need for it. You've got to be able to think about the need for it. Then you've got to be able to behave in such a way, not just think about the need for it. Then you've got to be able to affect your behavior, a la the first possibility up here, the first approach. And you have got to willfully, purposefully, and you know exactly what you're doing. When you can do it, you establish a full day of amnesty. And it's got to be, I said full now, it can't be some halfway, but you got a sham holiday. You got a holiday that's going to blow up on you. You have got to grant full amnesty for every apparent. I'm saying apparent, they just seem so to you. No discussion about, well, I thought so. Maybe I was wrong. You got to forgive, you got to forget, you've got to completely release every apparent treasonable, I'm still using, you notice, a kind of political backdrop verbally for this, every apparently treasonable, questionable, and ill-timed, which wraps it up, believe it or not, those three, acts ever apparently perpetrated on you, and all such actors who apparently were involved with these treasonable, questionable, or ill-timed events. I just felt inclined to throw it in. I think we'll stop. I think I'll give you a small intellectual excursion if you'll stop the public tape here for a second. Back. Good old intellectual excursion. Try and picture imagine. That's a hyphenated one word. A situation wherein there would be power uncontested. Now I know I said there was no such thing, but you know, who are you going to believe? Try and picture imagine a situation wherein there could be power uncontested. Other than that, I guess it's good night to California, Florida, New York, Montana, Oregon, North and South Dakota, Vermont, Wisconsin, Nevada, West Virginia, Cyprus,